guys got to see Dan Hooker versus Barboza. It did leave us with a couple of thoughts, and that was a kind of beating that nobody should have to take for as long as Dan Hooker took it. And when you are a fighter, it's very honorable. Dan Hooker will go in the back, and the fellow fighters will stand out of the way and pay him his due and his respect. The fighters are very rough and tumble guys that want those rocky moments. They want to show their heart, their toughness, their durability, their grit. They want to show that. I understand that. I understand that a fighter wants to do that. When that carries over to a cornerman, that's when I have when a flag goes up for me. Okay, when the fighter comes out with the mentality of I am willing to die in the ring. Okay, great. That's great, and you show that, and it's compelling. And there's a tremendous honor in that. But there is also a very obvious irresponsibility with those words. So that thought process and that psychology and that perceived toughness cannot carry over to an adult in the room who is in the corner with a towel over his shoulder that can not hesitate to throw that in. And when I see some of these corners allowing their fighters to take these beatings, I will tell you, for me as a cornerman, I am stopping that fight as soon as my fighter can no longer win the fight. As soon as it is clear that they have slowed down and they are damaged and their eyes are shut and their body is hurting and they are exhausted and they are not as good of an athlete, whatever mathematical deductions I have to make, when my fighter can no longer win is when we are headed to the back. And it won't be on him. It will not be on the fighter. I will make that decision, which is why he trusted me to be in his corner. And it is why the state overseeing it gave me a license, because I am a clear-headed adult in the room. And it's the whole reason I brought the towel to cage side. And if one of my cornermen sat on a towel, I was taking that kind of beating, they had better be prepared to take that same beating when I get to practice on Monday. And I feel that Dan Hooker, as honorable as this was, and within our sport, we do see that. And this is a very precious moment, and Dan will be looked at for what he is, which is a true warrior for the rest of his life, and there's something very special in that. But this isn't the first time we've seen somebody take a beating in a fight that should have very clearly been stopped because they had no more opportunity to win. The goal transferred to see how long can I hang in there. But what is the benefit of that? That's what really has to be questioned. And I will also tell you, I don't know how to fix this. I don't come to you with a suggestion. I have many times questioned the rounds. When we have 5-round fights, I have questioned that. We have seen fighters as recently as Yoel Romero and Robert Whitaker who went the full 25 minutes, and neither of them has fought since. The fight was so bad, and there was injury sustained, one that required surgery, another that required a cast, and neither athlete has been able to suit up and go to work again since. I suspect the same will be with Yair Rodriguez and the Zombie. And please don't fact correct me. I'm well aware there was 1 second left in the contest when the fight was stopped. But I do not think we will see either of those fighters be able to suit up and go to work again for a meaningful period of time. I argue that 5 rounds is too long. Now, what surprised me was I had some pushback from people. They said, oh, no, 5 rounds is great. What's he talking about? Well, I cannot respect you if you tell me 5 rounds is great. You have now showed me that you're not a sophisticated thinker. If you want to argue with me when I tell you 25 minutes is too long, and you want to come in and go, no, it should be 7 rounds, it should be 9 rounds, I can now at least know that you're a thinker. I may disagree with your thought, but I can at least now know that you're a thinker. If you go, oh no, 5 rounds is great. Why would 5 rounds possibly be great? Just on a simple level playing field of logic. It was an arbitrary number that was picked 15 years ago. Nothing in the sport that was arbitrarily picked 15 years ago still stays with us today. They have changed the weight classes. They have changed the regulations. They have changed the weigh-in times. They have changed the procedures that an athlete must go through just to get a license. But for some reason, some of you are telling me that the arbitrary 5 rounds that was pulled out of thin air and used as an experiment to go, let's just see what happens, somehow is the perfect number. That's just silly. Even combat such as boxing, if you were to look back at the 80s, the heyday, when I was growing up and I was watching with the true 4 horsemen, I'm talking about Hearns, Leonard, Hagler, Duran. Those guys were fighting 15 rounds. You don't see Mayweather and Canelo in there. You don't see Fury and Wilder and Joshua in there 15 rounds. They didn't just shave a round off like I'm suggesting, or 2 rounds off like I'm suggesting. They shaved 3 rounds off. So for the people who have pushed back on my premise that the athletes are simply out there too long, go right ahead if you want to add more rounds. We can then debate that. But to tell me, oh no, 5 rounds is perfect. How would it possibly be perfect? How would 5 rounds possibly be perfect? You have to understand, sport was in a different place when that was picked. The 5 rounds was picked largely because of a fight that took place between Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock that was scheduled for no time limit. Well, a half hour into it, the producers of the television show realized, we can't leave these guys out here all night. We got to do something. At some point, we got to fade to black and roll the credits. So even though it was not within the rules, they made a rule while the contest was going, and they go, okay, 30 minutes, we're calling this thing a draw, we're stopping it, we're moving on to the next fight. So some other guys looked at it, they go, yeah, 30 minutes, that was pretty close. That looked about right to me. Let's do 5 rounds. We'll give them a minute rest in between. Boom, that takes you up to your 30 minutes. Let's see what happens from there. Well, what we found out that happened from there was that the sport got tougher, the athletes got better, and 25 minutes was more than the human body was made to do. I think you can make that same argument on 15 minutes, quite frankly. I haven't the foggiest idea how we settle in on 15 minutes. It's a very long time. One, for as a fan, I don't enjoy watching something that long. I just think that's a little bit too long. You got to get out there, you got to prove your point to me, and we got to go home. That's for me as a fan. I could, of course, point to a number of 15-minute fights where I go, wow, that was fantastic. I'd have loved to have seen a 4th round. Sure, I could do that. But now I'm being selfish and thinking about me, and I'm not thinking about the contestants that are in there. So I think one way to solve the problem of these guys who are too tough for their own good possibly is to visit the round situation. I would also question what gets a fight stopped. I haven't the foggiest idea. I feel as though Dan Hooker was failed in 2 different departments. Like a mountain climber or like a window washer on top of a skyscraper, you have a secondary safety mechanism in place in case the first one fails you so that you can live. The first one that failed Dan Hooker was the referee. That fight should have been stopped. When the referee and that built-in mechanism failed him, he then has to go to a secondary mechanism, which is a trusted cornerman. Ariel Helwani had brought up a point on Ariel and the Bad Guy. Only on ESPN Plus, by the way. And it was a perspective that I had not heard before, and it wasn't an overly sophisticated perspective. I just hadn't heard it before. And he said, look, you have to understand the pay structure of MMA. You are generally paid to show up, and then you are paid an equal amount should you win. Your cornerman, traditionally, who is your coach, is in on that. 5%, 10%, whatever it could be, but he is in on a percentage of the business done that night, so he has a financial interest in not stopping the contest. I had not thought about it from that perspective, and Ariel's way of solving that wasn't just to sit the coaches down and say, hey, do what's best for your athlete. His way of solving that was to do away with the win bonus, to come up with a number that an athlete is given to participate. Okay. I mean, you could take some incentive away. I mean, there's a reason they do the show and win. I'm not 100% up to speed on that, but I see his point. That's a little bit different direction than I was going to go with it, but I can't deny that he makes a very fair point. I have wondered myself, why are they leaving those athletes out there so long? I can look back on Junior Dos Santos fights versus Cain Velasquez, where that fight was very, very clear in the first round who the winner was going to be. Time the second round ends and you're starting the third round, you're saying, man, why are they even letting him off his stool? Between the third and the fourth round, you're saying, what is going on here? Both of Junior's eyes are shut. He is slowed down. He is exhausted. He is now a punching bag. What are we still doing here? I think that the Ortega versus Max fight is a very fair one to bring up. And I can tell you when I started in this sport, this is a rough sport. I'm a rough guy. I am not a prude on these topics. But when I talk to you about things have changed and nothing is the same in the sport that it was 15 years ago, but some of you are still locked in on the arbitrary number of 5-minute rounds, and in main event situations, 5 of them, and I'm well aware that Barboza Hooker does not fall under that. But it does fall under the argument of, well, maybe these should be 4-minute rounds. What are we going to do to protect these athletes? What are we going to do to protect a tough guy from himself so that he can still get up on Monday morning and be with his family and be back in the gym in a reasonable period of time and then go back to work in 2 to 3 months and go out and compete again? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it, and what is going to be done? I don't have the answers, guys. I don't even have speculation on those answers. The only thing I have successfully done, and I'm attempting to do for you guys right now, is to identify that there appears to be a bit of a problem. And something needs to be done. We're in a similar situation with the weight cutting issue, where people are falling off the scale and they're dehydrated and they're ended up in the hospital and they're telling these horror stories after the fact. And Andy Foster in California stepped in and said, enough's enough. I've heard we're gonna make some changes. Whether I have the authority to change the sport or not, I can change it within these lines. My municipality of the state of California. I'm telling you now, Andy Foster is going to be looked back very fondly in MMA for seeing this and taking action. The next one appears to be, what are we going to do for these fighters that are too tough for their own good? When I started in this sport, the way it was explained to us in the locker room before we went out there, if you were hit 3 times without doing something back, you are now eligible for stoppage. I can't tell you a number of fights that I actually saw that happen, but that was still explained to us ahead of time. If you took 3 punches without answering back in some fashion, you were eligible for the referee to step in and stop the fight. Some guys, like Dan Hooker, that don't fall down, it puts him in a hard spot. It's very hard to stop a fight when the guy is still standing up. Look back at a fight you guys might remember, Mayweather versus McGregor. It's very hard for the referee to step in, and eventually he did, and he did the right thing. But it's just very tough for a referee to call a TKO while the guy is still standing. We saw Dan Hooker take shots amongst the head, the face, the legs, the body in repeated fashion without answering, where he was clearly hurt, where he was on fumes, and licensed adults in the room did not intervene. I don't have the answer for you.